Since the beginning, Vanguard has had some amazing concepts. From gifts to energy and everything before, after, and in between, all of these have been plagued with terrible execution. Each time Bushy reveals a new mechanic, I often find myself fantasizing of all the cool aspects it could bring to the game. I remember the first time they revealed the gift mechanic, I was over the moon. A mechanic that artificially introduced the rock, paper, scissors, triangle deck styles from other card games, this being control, aggro, and midrange. I imagine being able to choose which style you wanted for your clan. One could play aggro Angel Feather while the other plays control, all dependent on what gift your grade 3 gives you. What they had failed to mention was gifts weren't determined by the unit, but by the clan. Gone were my dreams of crafting my perfect Cog Arrow Protect deck to fit my personal playstyle. Instead, we were gifted with clans forced into these specific archetypes with no choice but to play them how we were told to. And none of these mechanics have been more promising, more mishandled, and more meaningless than the introduction of nations. With the introduction of D-Series in 2021, we were also introduced to Nations. Nations came about because Bushy essentially said supporting 23 clans was too difficult, and some players that played unpopular clans were dissatisfied having to wait upwards of 6 months to a year for a product they could engage with. This is business speak, for not every player needs to buy each new set every single month, and that's bad for making money. So they decided to condense these 23 clans into 5 colors. I mean nations. Well, technically 6 nations, but really just 5 plus Bermuda Triangle if we're being honest. Honestly, Lyrical was the best thing to happen to this game in my opinion, but my disdain for Bermuda is for another video. This video is about good ideas. Good ideas being in quotations. Now, I was personally really excited for Nations. They were a really good idea in theory, but much like I was let down with how gifts turned out, Nations turned out no less disappointing. You see, for a long time, Bushy has had a major issue with how they design sets. Vanguard booster sets are actually designed more like an LCG, but then ham-fisted into sets so that they can sell randomized booster packs because that's infinitely more profitable than any LCG business model. For those unfamiliar, an LCG is a living card game, or expandable card game if you're anyone other than Fantasy Flight Games, because they somehow managed to trademark the term LCG, which is like if Magic tried to trademark TCG, which they actually did in 1995. Sort of. It was actually kind of loose and no one really knows whether or not it was enforced, but that's why a lot of people made CCGs or collectible card games to avoid the issue entirely. But this patent expired in 2014 and that's why you see a lot more TCGs nowadays. But I'm tangenting. Back to the topic at hand. The idea behind LCGs is that instead of selling cards in a randomized booster pack, you sell the entire set as a whole. This lets competitive players get all the cards they need without having to fish for secret rares out of booster packs. This was a neat idea in theory, but in practice it completely eliminates collectors and Timmies that like buying a couple of packs here and there, which is about 2/3 your player base, so most LCGs have failed by now. Okay, now what does this have to do with Cardfight Vanguard? Well, Bushy Road likes to design their sets like LCGs. They start by making a deck and all of its support. Now they could sell that on its own like an LCG, but that's not a profitable business model, so instead, they design a bunch of terrible commons to cram in alongside these decks, put the decks in the high rarity slots, and sell it as a booster set. This is why Vanguard product feels so terrible to open, because whenever you go into a new set, you buy the deck and throw away everything else. This design practice became highly prevalent in V-Series, having a majority of decks consist of your VR, 2 triple rares ranging from grades 3 to 1, 2 double rares, normally grade 1s, but sometimes 2s and 3s. 4 of each of those is 20 cards, plus 16 triggers, and a starter's 37 cards. Now throw in 13 of the least bad commons and rares you can find, and boom, there's your deck. What does the second wave of support do? Well, it replaces the commons and rares with more triple and double rares, of course, with the new commons and rares left to rot. This was the pattern for most of V, with a third wave typically just giving you a new deck entirely because your current one was out of space for more triple rares. This is where Nations presented a golden opportunity. Now having 5 nations instead of 23 clans, Bushy could just give us cards. Cards we would have to pick from in order to construct decks with. Imagine being able to build a deck where you use the power of the Dark Irregulars to soul charge a Spike Brothers Juggernaut Maximum, to then use Pale Moon's abilities to call it from your soul, then sending Juggernaut back into your deck, only to then time leap it with a unit from Gear Chronicle. Constructing an engine that utilized the power of an entire nation could be so much fun and provides endless possibilities. Combine this with the new ride line, you can now ensure a specific ride sequence to be able to set up your unique strategy. You can make sure you ride a grade 1 that gets your maximum into the soul, a grade 2 that finds your time leaper, and end on a grade 3 that called out the Juggernaut. So what did Bushy give us? None other than their favorite balancing cheat code, the Get Out of Broken Jail free card. name locking. If you don't know what name locking is, well, you just haven't been playing Vanguard, but I'll explain it anyway. Name locking mostly refers to a card effect that only activates when you have a Vanguard or other unit with a specific name. Why is this bad, you ask? Because it lets Bushy simply recycle the sins of its past. So now instead of 23 clans, we now get the loving support for over 100 ride lines. And that's not even counting the collab decks. By having the units in the ride line only work when specific units ride over them, your ride line is now just an extension of your deck's boss monster rather than a setup tool personally crafted to get your unique strategy rolling. Once you've settled on a boss monster, you've also by default settled on your ride line as well. Now before you storm into the comments, I understand there are some generic ride lines, but the good deeds of one do not forgive the sins of hundreds. So we don't get to make many, if any, interesting choices when constructing our ride line. That's fairly disappointing, but how about the rest of the deck? We have an entire nation's worth of cards to work with. Surely there will be several iterations of the same grade 3. Wrong again, my friend. Whenever a new ride line is released, it's accompanied by a handful of support cards whose effects are not only specifically designed to work with a specific grade 3, much like that of clans, but they name lock it to only functioning if you have said grade 3. Which means that deck building merely consists of choosing your grade 3 and filling your deck with cards with that grade 3's name in their card text, because those are the cards that best fit your strategy because they are specifically designed to do so. Now where have I heard of this before? Oh yeah. Looks like the problem wasn't that supporting 23 clans was difficult, it was that there weren't enough shiny new toys to get people to buy into each new product that releases every month. So now instead of printing a set with only 4 clans that 4/23 of the player base might purchase, in actuality it was way more than that because a majority of the player base played multiple clans, but it did cause products that featured unpopular clans to rot on LGS shelves. Instead, each set now has 5 to 6 new clans, and surely everyone will like at least one of them. And let's not forget to mention the sheer difficulty of supporting these 100+ archetypes. In V, you could count on the fact that your chosen clan will get 1 set of support a year at the very least, but now you go into every set with the hope that you might get a single double rare. And there's still a chance that double rare doesn't even help your strategy at all. Standard is designed to make you constantly build new decks because eventually your deck will just age into obscurity, leaving you clinging to the hope that maybe, just maybe, this next set will have a single card that has the possibility of improving your strategy. And don't forget, this set introduces 5 new decks that will be added to the pool of decks competing for support slots in the next set. And since those decks are new, you know dang well they're gonna take priority. More reinforcement that if you aren't playing with the shiny new toys, why even bother? If you want to play with a new card, you're gonna either have to build a whole new deck, or pray that your only pieces of support aren't a -1 for Battle Door and a card we already own. Okay, so Bushy's still making full decks and putting them into sets surrounded by draft chaff in a game that doesn't even support draft, which it totally could. Subscribe if you want the drafting Vanguard video. So they can call it a booster set and sell packs to make more money. Surely there aren't enough archetype cards for a full 50. And we have nations now, so surely we'll have to add in some amount of generic cards, if nothing else but to hit the legal deck count. So by nature, there must assuredly be playable generic cards within a nation. And after an amount of sets, that will increase the generic card pool to a point where you absolutely will have to make a meaningful decision about which cards you play to support your given strategy, much like Yu-Gi-Oh! Right? Wrong. Let's put our critical thinking caps on. How would Bushiroad go about designing cards for a nation that are generically powerful? Well, by doing the same thing they did in V and making them triple rares, of course. Now, I want to use this section to talk about card game design for a second. When making cards for a game, card power level can be scaled vertically or horizontally. Now, to discuss this, I will need to bring up everybody's favorite game, Magic the Gathering. I know, you're all sick of hearing about Magic the Gathering, but it's the best all-encompassing example and is the game every other game ever cribs its notes from, so I'm gonna talk about it and you're gonna listen because it's important. So, vertical power level is pretty easy to understand. Cards that are just better than other cards. A recent example is Cancel and the newly released Refute. Refute is the same card but better. This is on purpose, by the way. Cancel was too expensive to ever see play, so they added an extra effect to make it a more considerable inclusion in decks. Another example of vertical power level tends to be in Rarity, where rares and mythics are typically more powerful than commons and uncommons, but we'll circle back to this one. What makes Magic interesting is its horizontal power level. Horizontal cards aren't necessarily better than each other in a vacuum, they're better situationally. Let's look at Essence Scatter and Negate. The way in which these cards are better than each other is situationally dependent. One counters creatures, and the other counters non-creatures. You now have to make a choice. What are you most worried about? Some decks struggle to deal with problematic creatures, so they'll opt for Essence Scatter, while others can't deal with spells that disrupt their combo, so they'll opt for Negate. Alternatively, you could play Disdainful Stroke, which can counter whatever you want so long as it costs 4 or more, or Mana Leak, which can counter anything, unless your opponent pays 3. All of these cards have the same cost, but stop different things with different caveats, so it's up to you, the player, to decide which route you'll take to achieve your goal. This is what makes deck building interesting. It's not a pile of the best available options, but a set of tools you bring to solve a problem. So, how does Vanguard scale the power level of their cards? Why, almost exclusively vertically, of course. In Vanguard, triple rares are better than double rares, which are better than rares, which are better than commons. Just look at V. The only reason decks weren't comprised entirely of triple rares was either there weren't enough of them, or others were name locked to a different grade 3 that you weren't playing. Pretty much the only time you'd willingly choose to play a rare was because it gained you some kind of resource. So what did Bushy do when it came time to design generic cards for the nations? I'll make them triple rares, obviously. And since triple rares are the strongest cards, when it comes time to add generics to your deck, you immediately look at these. Now, I will acknowledge that there are generics at lower rarities like Bulbamine or Shenry. But those are one-off, almost fluke cards. These triple rares were specifically designed to be generic cards that slot into almost any deck. So instead of getting to make the interesting decision of which counterspell fits my specific needs, the question now becomes, do I own the triple rares? If yes, play them, and if no, settle for something worse, I guess. There is, however, the slightest glimmer of hope. With the recent reveal of the Persona Shield Cyclers, we're seeing these triple rare generics starting to compete for the same slots, much like the counterspells we looked at earlier. This is good for deck building choices, but a huge problem is cost. They're triple rares. Triple rares everybody needs, so by default they'll command a decent price tag, so you're gonna need to be pretty well off to even make this decision. Whereas in Magic, the cards are common, making them a deck building choice every player has access to. I'm sure everyone will agree that as rarity increases, the card's applicability should become nicher and nicher. Commons are cards everyone needs, whereas high rarity cards like a triple rare or a mythic should be cards with decks built around them. Vanguard gets so close to accomplishing this by having grade 3 bosses be triple rares. Not everyone needs them because if you buy the boss, it's safe to say you're building the entire deck as well. After all, the card's useless on its own. But generic triple rares break this formula and are a masterclass in speedrunning, making a card inaccessible. You can also see this rarity power disparity just by comparing the cycles themselves. Like, take the price of the energy cyclers and compare them to like those double rare grade 2 cyclers. I can put the energy cyclers in almost anything and they'll be of value to me. But what the heck am I gonna do with these guys? These only work in very niche scenarios. So just by looking at these cycles, we can see that the rarer the card is, the more likely it is that you're gonna need it. And that's not a great look. It's funny to look at how on paper, nations were a fantastic idea. They would allow Bushy to stop designing decks and instead design sets. A collection of cards and tools for us, the player base, to collect and experiment with. A grade 3 boss can have many different deck variations based on the rearguards you choose to surround it with. Vanguard could have finally been draftable, which in my opinion is the single best way to engage with the TCG. But instead, what we got was more of the same. Booster sets consisting of a deck surrounded by a bunch of useless commons because they're strictly worse than the cards rarer than them. Which makes opening booster packs almost worthless, because what are you looking for? Any card you could need you've already bought, since Bushy designs cards to tell you what decks to put them in, so you'll almost never discover a new card that can improve your strategy, because any new card you may stumble upon will command the construction of an entirely new deck. So you're expected to just buy the whole deck at the start to avoid the problem entirely. The only thing you can really look forward to opening is a frame rare upgrade of a card you already own, or maybe an expensive generic you couldn't afford. But you should never open packs if what you need is a single card, so if you ever find yourself in this situation, you're already kind of out of luck. Also, what's with them giving us sideboard cards for a game that doesn't have a sideboard? In every way nations could have been an amazing idea, Bushy decided to go in the opposite direction, so they could do more of the same under the guise of improvement. It's a tale as old as time, honestly. Identifying a problem and offering a solution that is in actuality a worse version of said problem. You say you're upset that your clan only gets one set of support a year, but what they hear is a customer who can only purchase one product a year. The solution? New clans every set. Something for everyone to purchase. Oh, you don't like any of the new decks, so you won't buy the set? well, here's a new cycle of generic triple rares that you'll need no matter what deck you own, so you dang well better buy this new set. But don't forget about the set next month, and the 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 next month. Thank you so much for watching the video. If you liked it, be sure to subscribe and let me know what you thought down in the comments. This video didn't feel like it really fit the whole crash out format, so I tried to do a little more video essay style. So if you like this formatting, let me know and I'll be sure to make more. But don't worry, there will be more crash outs to come, with Bushy Road constantly revealing more and more nonsense, so be on the lookout for that, and I'll see you next time.